Welcome back to the Catholic Cinema Crusade podcast. Today is Saturday, November 25th, and it is our Thanksgiving episode number 12. Let's get started. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit, amen. Dear Lord, on this holiday of thanks, we offer profound thanks for all the blessings in our lives, for all of the beauty that is around us, especially in cinema and in television and all the media that you've given to us, and help us to have a wonderful holiday and to be grateful for all the blessings in our life. Okay, on this Thanksgiving episode, we're going to be looking at two Thanksgiving specials. We're going to be looking at the 1973 Peanut special, It's Thanksgiving, Charlie Brown. And then we'll also be looking at a much more recent episode, the Thanksgiving episode of Chipchilla on Benke, which just came out this past week. We'll also be talking just a little bit about the holiday and why I think it's actually one of the more underappreciated holidays in our culture. So first, let's just talk about Thanksgiving in general. Now, for centuries, Christians across Europe and throughout the whole world have had Thanksgiving festivals. It was not uncommon, especially in the medieval to the Renaissance era, that after a bountiful harvest, you would have a special service or a prayer to give thanks to God for that good harvest. And so when the Puritan pilgrims came over in the early part of the 1600s, it would have been natural if they had a bountiful harvest to have a Thanksgiving celebration. And our modern day national holiday of Thanksgiving really has its origins to an event that happened in 1621. So the Pilgrims who left the Great Britain in the early part of the 1600s, that's primarily because they thought Anglicanism was too Catholic in its practice, and they wanted to be more Protestant, and originally they went to the Netherlands, but they had some difficulties there. So in 1621, they of course came on the Mayflower over to the New World. They tried to get agriculture going. They tried to make their Massachusetts colony work, but they had a very, very difficult go of it at first. In fact, about half their number died in their first winter. It was only through the intervention of the Native Americans who helped them out and taught them how to plant that they were eventually able to regain. And in the fall of 1621, they finally, for the first time, had a really good harvest. And so to mark that event, they had a feast where they invited the Native Americans who helped them, and they had a lot of game and crops that were from the New World, but also some of the things that they imported from the Old World, and they had a Thanksgiving festival, okay? Now, again, this was a regular thing that happened after a bountiful harvest, so it wasn't like they made a holiday right then and there, but that was really the origins of the idea of a Thanksgiving celebration. Now, periodically throughout our history, such harvest festivals were made, but the first kind of official holiday where we as a nation together celebrate a day of thanks came in 1863 in the middle of the Civil War. Abraham Lincoln proclaimed a national day of thanks, and he picked the last Thursday in November. Now, what's important about this is right in the middle of the thick of the Civil War. We're still not sure who's going to win, the North or the South. We're not sure what's going to happen. There's been a lot of bloodshed. It was a chaotic time. And so he particularly chose this moment to say, this is when we're going to give thanks to God. In other words, even despite our suffering, we are going to focus on what we can be grateful for, including our nation that we hope to preserve. Fast forward about 80 years later, Franklin Delano Roosevelt wants to make this holiday a national holiday, and he's the one who picks the third Thursday in November, what it is today. He's the one who encourages Congress to put it forward. And the wheels of this, of course, it takes time to make a bill become a law. The wheels of this really happen in the spring and the fall of 1941. Again, a very difficult time. We're still in the middle of the Great Depression. We also haven't started World War II yet, but we know that war is going on. It had been going on for 2 years at this point in Europe. We know the Japanese had been making inroads in the Pacific. And again, looking at all the chaos and difficulty in the world, he said, now's the time for a day of thanks. And then, of course, Pearl Harbor happened, and it was shortly after Pearl Harbor that both the Senate and the House passed the bill, and he signed it, and that became our modern day of Thanksgiving. So it's important to understand that Thanksgiving isn't just about giving thanks, but giving thanks in the context of difficult times, recognizing that even when our luck is down, that we still have a lot to be grateful for, whether that's after a difficult time getting agriculture going, or in the midst of a war, or a threat of war, or economic difficulties, to always give thanks, to recognize that everything is a grace for God. And so that brings us to our two specials. So first, the 1973 Peanuts special. Now, by this point, the Peanuts gang had a number of television specials. They were very popular. Of course, the most famous was in 1966, I believe, for the Christmas special. This one is a little bit lighter on just the materials. It focuses on kind of this, not prank, but basically Peppermint Patty, Charlie Brown's friend, invites herself over for Thanksgiving dinner. Charlie Brown wasn't planning on making a Thanksgiving dinner, but he wants to be a good host, so he arranges this meal, and she keeps inviting more and more people over to his house. And so he tries to prepare this meal. He and Snoopy and Linus, they make popcorn, they make pretzel sticks, they try to make toast and to make this meal, and they set up a table outside and these chairs. And then, everybody comes, and the high point is when they say a prayer, and Linus, of course, who's kind of the unofficial Snoopy chaplain, like in Charlie Brown Christmas, says a prayer where he reminds them of the Pilgrims' origins and how they need to give thanks for the blessings in our lives, especially our freedom and the bounty of food before us. And then it's revealed what the food is, and Peppermint Patty's really mad that it's not turkey and stuffing and cranberry sauce. It's just kind of this rudimentary snack food. But again, this is like an 8-year-old kid, and he's made this whole meal just with him and one or two of his friends and his dog, and she has the gall to criticize this meal. And of course, Marcy comes and kind of brings her to her senses and say, hey, you invited yourself over here, and he did the best he could, and it all works out. But basically it shows that even when things don't go right, we still have a lot to be grateful for. Okay? It's a fantastic, short, half-an-hour special. It's funny, it's heartwarming, it reminds us of the true meaning of Thanksgiving. It's just all around a really, really, really good show. And because it's a good show, in our modern, more secular time in 2023, it of course has been put under attack. Now, what's really interesting when you look at a lot of the news articles that have come out about Thanksgiving the last week that have focused, interestingly enough, specifically on this episode, what they've really honed in on is the character of Franklin. Now, if you know a little bit about the Peanuts history, Franklin was an African-American character, and he was introduced as a friend of Charlie Brown and one of Charlie Brown's gang at a time when African-Americans were not extraordinarily visible in, the Sunday morning comics. So it was a little bit of a trailblazer. It wasn't, like Jackie Robinson coming to the majors or Rosa Parks and her civil rights activism. But it was kind of a small way of just kind of showing and trying to bring more diversity into the comics era and that sort of thing, which is a good thing, okay? And so having him on the show as one of the friends of Charlie Brown, he came and was part of the celebration. And again, it's done a very normal way. And on the one hand, people really celebrated this. They celebrated like, there's this African-American character in a Snoopy special. It was this big deal. It's 1973. It's not that long after the Civil Rights Act, that sort of thing. But what's interesting is they also found something to complain, because they, quote, noticed that when the table is set up, like there's some people at the front, some people at the side, some people on the back, but then Franklin appears to be by himself on his side. He's also in a chair that like sloops down, so he's lower than everybody else, and this is done kind of for comic effect. And they wonder if this was a way of sliding Franklin, or I've seen people on X writing like, why is Franklin all by himself on his side of the table? Well, if you watch the whole special, it explains why this happens. When they were setting up the table, they were putting up the chairs, Snoopy was having trouble opening a folding chair because sometimes it's hard, and so he imagined himself fighting this folding chair, and they get into this battle. So when Franklin sits in the folding chair, it like half collapses. And that's kind of funny because we, the audience, know what happened. And it has nothing to do with the person of Franklin or his race or anything. It's just kind of a funny little joke because we, the audience, know it. And it's a little joke, and then they just move on and they have the meal, and it's not a big deal. But of course, people like to make it a really big deal. And I think, unfortunately, this shows a trend where we take this, wonderful piece of art. You see this a lot, especially in the early Disney films, that admittedly was part of its time, part of its culture, but gets read with a modern lens in a way that really skews what it's essentially about, okay? And I don't think, well, this is true sometimes. I don't think in this specific context it really had anything to do about slighting Franklin or making him an off character. It was just the typical Snoopy hijinks that we always see in these sorts of episodes. All right, moving on to Chipchilla. Now, Chipchilla opened with a lot of fanfare. I made a whole episode about Bentkey and how I really liked the show and how it was clearly a Bluey knockoff, but that's okay. It's still a really good show. And this is the first new episode we've gotten since the launch of Bentkey roughly about a month ago. Now, what I've been somewhat disappointed with is when Bentkey launched, Jeremy Boring, the CEO of Daily Wire, which produced it, made a big promise that every Saturday there would be new cartoons, that he was bringing back Saturday morning cartoons, and they would release new stuff. Now, when Bentkey released, it had 8 episodes of Chipchilla, but then nothing else came out. Saturday after Saturday came and went, and there was some new stuff released, but no Chipchilla, which is really kind of their flagship show. And then they announced they were having a Thanksgiving episode. And so I was really excited. I'm like, okay, this is the first episode. So it starts playing, and right away, right off the bat, I noticed something rather significant, which is that arguably the protagonist of the show is like Bluey, the show's about the kids, but Bandit's kind of the breakout star. The dad in Chipchilla is kind of the breakout star, and he was played by Rob Schneider, the SNL comedy actor who was easily their biggest name on that show and perhaps in all of Bentkey. And he was replaced by someone else. He's not in this episode. So it leaves the question up, is Rob Schneider continuing to voice the dad? Is he gone now? We really don't know. There hasn't been any sort of announcement, but it was kind of weird right off the bat. The episode itself, while it talks about the experience of the first pilgrims and it kind of goes through the story, it's more about the idea of tradition itself. So it starts off with the Chipchilla family visiting their grandpa and grandma, and he wants to teach them the lesson of the pilgrims, but the way he did homeschool for the Chipchilla father was different than the way he does it with his kids. And so there's kind of a misunderstanding about the best way to do this, and ultimately they come to the idea that, we're going to do it in the way Grandpa does it because we're with Grandpa, and it's important to honor your tradition. So, yes, it tells the story of the pilgrims, but it does so in the way of really focusing on why tradition is important. It's a fun episode, and my kids really enjoyed it, but it's not as sophisticated as Peanuts. I think Chipchilla, while it's got a really good start, does have some growing to do. The characters need a little bit more fleshing out. Certainly the stories need a little bit more fleshing out. But it's still very promising. And the fact that they're talking about the importance of tradition, specifically with Thanksgiving, I don't think is unintentional. It's very much because they understand that in our culture today, the meaning of Thanksgiving is trying to be reframed, and the narrative around Thanksgiving is no longer kind of this story of harmony between the Pilgrims and the Native Americans and giving thanks to God. It's a different context, okay, which we'll talk about next in the conclusion, kind of looking at these two together, okay? So Thanksgiving, I think, is a really underrated and overlooked holiday, but is remarkably important. It's sandwiched between two much bigger commercial holidays, which is Halloween and Christmas, which get much more money for the stores and the corporations. It's primarily food-based. People usually don't decorate their lawns for Thanksgiving or, have big parties in the sense of, they have obviously the Thanksgiving meal with their family, but it's not kind of an event that expands over weeks the way Halloween and Christmas do. But it's really important. As Linus says in the 1973 episode, we were the first country to make a national day of thanks and write it into law. Now again, harvest festivals and Thanksgiving festivals have been going on for many centuries. We certainly were not the first country to invent the idea, but we thought it was important enough to physically, legally ingrain it in our culture. And that's one of the reasons, why I think this nation, while it has many faults, is rather exceptional in world history, in its relationship to God, in the freedoms that it brought people, and as a result, the success that it's had. Holidays are important, and the stories that surround holidays are an important part of creating a common culture. There's lots of different ethnicities, lots of different races, lots of different religions, lots of different creeds that come in, and they make this beautiful melting pot that we call America. This is one of our important aspects, that we really do have lots of different people from different backgrounds. And all these people come to these backgrounds, and they each bring something important with them that collectively makes this story. And these stories are part of our culture. And the story behind Thanksgiving is about harmony and thanks to God, primarily. But that story is trying to be reframed. Every year, whenever it gets to Thanksgiving, you hear again and again and again, oh, yes, it's important to give thanks, but we also have to talk about the relationship between the early Europeans who came to the Americas and how they fought often with the Native Americans. And, this led to all kinds of difficulties in the reservation system. And all of that is important. It's real history. It's important to talk about. But Thanksgiving, one of the reasons it was such an important holiday is it represented a point of harmony between the Native Americans and the Pilgrims, how they both recognized a need and they came together in peace. And yet it's this day, unfortunately, that people use to really highlight a lot of the difficulties between Native Americans and Europeans as they came over during the Age of Discovery. We've already seen in our culture how Columbus Day has been essentially eliminated. You don't hear about it anymore. It's not talked about. And when someone mentions Columbus Day or wishes someone happy Columbus Day or talks about, making a craft in school about, the three ships that brought over, it's almost seen as kind of a violent act, like, oh, you're advocating for some sort of violent experience, like when there was violence between the Europeans and the Native Americans, rather than celebrating ingenuity and adventure and the things that Columbus Day has historically means. I mean, we can go into Columbus Day another time. It's actually also very much, especially for Catholics, important because it was a way to highlight the importance of Catholic contribution to the United States at a time when Catholics were experiencing a lot of persecution here in the United States, which is one of the reasons it was founded. But anyway, we're not here to talk about Columbus Day. My point is that Columbus Day has been largely made uncelebratory in our culture in really the last 20 years. And now it seems like the same thing is sort of happening in Thanksgiving. Now, I think it will be harder to do that because, number one, honestly, Thanksgiving is much more commercial and it's ingrained as part of our economy. But also because it has, again, this context of giving thanks is really important. Nonetheless, I do see a lot of pushback against it, and I think both of these specials do a good job of kind of pushing back and saying this is really what it's about. And so I think it's important to protect this holiday, to protect our story and this culture, to be honest about our shortcomings, but also honest about the progress we've made. And my big worry is, if Columbus Day falls and Thanksgiving is next, what's next after that? Whether it's Christmas or Independence Day, it's important to understand that these stories and holidays are essential to our experience of Americans. But even if, God forbid, this comes to pass and Thanksgiving is not able to be celebrated, we still have a lot to be thankful for. And independent of whatever nation you're a part of, whatever group you're a part of, whether you're experiencing intense persecution or experiencing intense freedom, we always have a lot to give thanks for. And these two specials show that thanks comes amidst difficulty. And if it's easy to give thanks in difficulty, well, how much easier is it to give thanks when we are here in the United States experiencing so many blessings? So I encourage you to give thanks to the loved ones in your life, to your friends, to the people around you. God bless you. Hope you have a great Thanksgiving. And watch Chipchilla, watch Peanuts. They're both great. Although Peanuts is a little better. Thank you. Have a wonderful week.